Okay, let's just jump right into it. Today, in this explainer, we're turning our analytical lens onto America's third president, Thomas Jefferson. We all know him, right? He's famously known for his utopian visions of liberty, he's a champion of the common man, and a brilliant philosopher. But, and this is a big but, he was also a man of stark, undeniable contradictions, literally a walking paradox. So we're going to balance his soaring ideology against the really complex realities of his time just to see how his deeply complicated legacy actually still shapes American politics today. Here's our roadmap. We'll be breaking this whole thing down into 5 key areas: the election drama of 1800, the fall of the Federalists, Jefferson as the agrarian idealist, his major policies, and finally, we'll wrap up with those great contradictions.
All right, part 1, the election drama of 1800.
So the political chaos that brought Jefferson to power was just absolutely unprecedented. Let's walk through this truly bizarre electoral process. Back then, they used this indirect electoral college voting system. And the rules? Well, they were simple, but they were fundamentally flawed. Basically, the candidate with the highest votes became president, and the second highest became vice president. Sounds okay on paper, right? But this system resulted in a historic, dead-even tie between Thomas Jefferson and his own party's running mate, Aaron Burr. Since neither had an absolute majority, the whole shebang got thrown to the House of Representatives. And get this, they deadlocked an incredible 36 times. Just picture the sheer exhaustion and the bitter tension in that room. Vote after vote and still no winner. It really vividly illustrates a young political system just completely buckling under the pressure of newly organized party factions. And here is where we hit one of history's great ironies. Alexander Hamilton, Jefferson's staunch rival, actually intervenes. Well, maybe intervenes is putting it mildly. He basically orchestrated the outcome. Hamilton wielded his massive influence in the House to convince key figures to vote for Jefferson over Burr, mostly because he considered Jefferson the lesser of two evils. This exact crisis and Hamilton's dramatic intervention directly led to the 12th Amendment in 1804. That changed the Constitution forever, mandating separate electoral votes for the president and vice president. A real game changer. Moving right along to Section 2, the fall of the Federalists. Let's look at the stark contrast between the incumbent party and the challengers. So the Federalists favored a strong centralized government, but they were deeply crippled by internal conflicts, especially this bitter ongoing feud between President John Adams and Alexander Hamilton. They were practically tearing each other apart. Meanwhile, Jefferson's Democratic Republicans, they stepped up as this highly organized, unified party of the common man. They masterfully capitalized on all the public outrage against those Federalist policies to seize political momentum. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly did the Federalists do to trigger all that outrage? Well, in a highly restrictive move, they passed the Alien Acts. This drastically extended the wait for American citizenship from 5 to 14 years. 14 years. Even worse, they passed the deeply unpopular Sedition Acts, which essentially made it illegal to openly criticize the government, literally a direct attack on free speech. And finally, in an act of absolute desperation right before leaving office, Adams pushed through the controversial midnight appointments. He was frantically packing the courts with Federalist judges at the 11th hour. Needless to say, these heavy-handed moves completely alienated the public and just cleared the path for Jefferson's victory. Yet despite all this intense rivalry, 1801 marked a peaceful transfer of power. We absolutely cannot overstate the historical magnitude of this moment. I mean, think about it. In a world still overwhelmingly dominated by monarchs and violent, bloody uprisings, John Adams peacefully handed over the reins of power to his fiercest political rival. It was a massive stabilizing milestone for the young republic. It proved that this crazy democratic experiment might actually survive its own internal divisions. Let's pivot to Section 3, the agrarian idealist. So what was Jefferson's ultimate vision for what America should become? His ideology is fascinatingly structured. First, he insisted on a really small cabinet, basically to prevent the federal government from ever mirroring a dictatorship. He was a strict constitutionalist. But above all, he believed in agrarian strength. He strongly felt an economy based on independent farmers was both morally and practically superior to one based on heavy industry. He championed the universal right to self-determination, and he firmly believed that education was the absolute foundation of democracy. Without an educated public, he argued, true liberty would just collapse. And this brings us directly to a key concept: economic liberalism. This is an economic system characterized by minimal government interference in industries and markets. Jefferson passionately believed that the federal government should stay completely out of the economic affairs of the everyday person. He wanted citizens to manage their own prosperity without heavy taxes or federal oversight breathing down their necks.
Okay, Section 4, Major Policies and Actions.
Let's shift from ideology to action. What did Jefferson actually do once he was sitting behind the desk in the Oval Office? I want you to focus on this number, 5. This represents the number of years required to become a citizen under Jefferson. One of his very first acts as president was to aggressively push to restore the Naturalization Act right back to a 5-year wait, completely undoing that oppressive 14-year requirement set by the Federalists. It was a massive statement about welcoming new Americans. And he certainly didn't stop there. He systematically went to work dismantling the Federalist state. He immediately repealed the hated Sedition Acts to restore free speech. Opposing the plans for high federal revenue, he slashed the budget and imposed very, very low taxes. He turned around and provided financial subsidies directly to farmers to boost his beloved agrarian economy. He even helped establish a Republican newspaper to widely spread these democratic ideals. And later in life, cementing his lifelong conviction that education fuels freedom, he achieved what he considered his crowning ideological achievement, founding the University of Virginia in 1825. Finally, Section 5, the Great Contradictions. Now we really need to pause here and contrast Jefferson's beautifully written words with his harsh, undeniable realities. This is where it gets incredibly complicated. He famously penned the immortal phrase, "All men are created equal." Yet he relied heavily on child slavery at his own Monticello plantation. He was touted as a fierce champion of civil liberties, but in reality, he systematically denied basic voting rights to women, Native Americans, and Black people. And economically, well, he campaigned aggressively against the central bank, labeling it an elite, corrupt institution. But once he actually had executive power, he pragmatically maintained that very same bank to pay off the staggering debts of the American Revolution. The complexity only deepens. Ideologically, he held a remarkably strong pro-French sentiment, viewing their revolution as a continuation of America's. But the brutal realities of international affairs and trade forced him to adopt a strict foreign policy of neutrality. Furthermore, he envisioned a society with universal access to technology and science. He conducted his own elaborate agricultural experiments at Monticello, but the bitter irony of his agrarian utopia was that extreme poverty blocked the common man's access. Instead of democratizing innovation, technology remained a luxury strictly reserved for the wealthy elite. He just couldn't bridge that massive economic gap. There is so much more to unpack with Jefferson, and the story continues in our next analysis. We'll be diving headfirst into the monumental Supreme Court case of Marbury versus Madison, which permanently established judicial review. And of course, we'll explore his massive, constitutionally questionable land grab, the Louisiana Purchase. You absolutely won't want to miss how those incredible events further shape his deeply complicated legacy. But I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder. How does history evaluate a leader whose utopian visions of equality were built directly on a foundation of profound contradictions? It's a really complex legacy, one that forces us, as students of history, to reconcile the brilliant democratic ideals of the American founding with its darkest, most painful realities. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning and keep exploring the crucial layers of our past.